रिकॉर्ड करना स्टार्ट कर दी।
प्लीज स्टार्ट कंसा।
टुडे माय टॉपिक इज प्रोबेबिलिटी सैम्पलिंग। बिस्मिल्लाहिर्रहमानिर्रहीम। Everything in life is temporary. If things are going good, enjoy it. If things are going bad, don't worry, it won't last forever either. Learning outlines. It includes introduction, definition, types of probability sampling, sampling design process, advantage and disadvantages of probability sampling. Learning outcomes. By the end of this presentation, participant will be able to describe the probability sampling, various types of probability sampling. Introduction. Sampling is the process of selecting observation or sample to provide an adequate description and inferences of a population. Sample. It is a unit that is selected from the population and it represents the whole population, and its purpose is to draw the inference regarding the population. Sampling frame. Listing of population from which a sample is chosen is known as sampling frame. For example, this is a population n, and from this population we draw a unit which represents the whole population, and it is represented as sample small n. And the basic purpose of drawing a sample is to draw inference regarding the population. Sampling. Sampling is actually from first we select the sampling frame, then from the population through sampling process we draw a sample which is actually observed in the data set, and then from this sample we draw inference and generalize this result to the population from which the sample is drawn. Sampling design process. First of all, we define the population, then we determine the sampling frame in the population, determining the sampling procedures. Either we follow the probability sampling or non-probability sampling. Probability sampling includes simple random, stratified, cluster sampling, system sampling, systematic sampling, and multi-stage sampling. And it may be either non-probability sampling, convenient, judgmental, quota sampling, snowball sampling, and then we determine the appropriate sample size and then execute the sampling design. Today we focus on the probability sampling. What is the probability sampling? Probability sampling is a sampling technique wherein the samples are gathered in a process that gives all the individuals in the population equal chance of being selected. Types of probability sampling. It may includes random sampling, systematic random sampling, stratified random sampling, cluster random sampling, and multi-stage sampling. First of all, random sampling. It is a random sample of the subset of statistical population in which each member of the subset has an equal probability or chance of being chosen. Our most common is simple random sample, which is meant to be an unbiased representation of the group. In simple random sampling method, we prepare a list of population members initially, which is known as the sampling frame, and then each member is marked with a specific number. For example, there are nth members, and then they will be numbered from 1 to n. From this population, researchers choose random samples using the two ways. Either it can use the random number tables or random numbers generator softwares, which can generate the random numbers. Example of simple random sampling. For example, in the total workforce in organization, there is 300 uh, total workforce, and we can conduct a survey. A sample group of 30 employees is selected to do the survey. In this population, in this case, the population is the total number of employees in the company, which is 300, and the sample group of 30 employees is selected by either the computer generated number or using the table. Advantages of simple random sampling. The main advantages provide minimal knowledge of population needed and easy to analyze the data. Disadvantage, it include low frequency of use. does not use the researcher's expertise, uh, larger risk of random error. Now come the another type of probability sampling, which is systematic random sampling. Within this systematic random sampling, there is an equal chance or probability of selecting each unit from within the population when creating the sample. In this systematic random sampling, we all order the unit in the sampling frame, then calculate the sampling interval. And from this sampling interval, we can choose the individual in subsequent order. For example, to select a random sample of 1000 people from a population of 50,000 using systematic sampling, all the potential participants must be placed in a list and starting point should be selected. Once the list is formed, every fifth person on the list, starting the count at a selected starting point, which may be hypothetical. For example, we say 50th person would be chosen as participant. We calculate the sampling interval by dividing the total population, which is 50,000, to a sampling unit, which is 1000 population, and this is a 50. And then sampling interval will be 50. If that's but we randomly choosing the starting point. If the starting point will be 20, then the every 70th person on the list would be chosen, followed by 120, and so on until we reach the final sample size. Means every 50 interval we can choose the further participant in the study. Advantage of systematic random sampling: it is moderately costly and moderate usage. It is simple to draw sample, easy to verify, but its major it is advantages require periodic ordering required. Next type is stratified random sampling. In stratified random sampling is also known as proportional random sampling. A stratified sample sampling involves dividing the entire population into homogeneous group called strata. In this, the group is homogeneous and which is divided into strata. For example, we can divide the population into age, socioeconomic strata, or gender. Then, from this strata, we can randomly select samples from each strata. Example of stratified random sampling: let's say 100 students of school having 1000 students were asked questions about their favorite subject. It is fact that the student of 8th grade will have different subject preferences and the student of 9th grade. In this, we divide the students into different grades, 8th or 9th grades. We divide the population into strata, and from these strata we can select the individuals either by simple random sampling or systematic sampling. Stratified random sampling advantages: it assures representation of all groups in sample population. Characteristics of each stratum can be estimated and comparison can be made between the different stratums. Disadvantage: it requires accurate information on proportion of each stratum and it costly to prepare the stratified list. Now come the cluster random sampling. In cluster sampling, instead of selecting all the individual from entire population, the population is divided into subgroups or clusters, which is like a families. A simple random sample is then taken from each cluster. In these random sampling, these clusters are mutually homogeneous, but internally heterogeneous groupings are evident. Example of cluster random sampling: for example, a researcher may be interested in data about city taxes in the Florida. The researcher would compile data from selected cities and compile them to get a picture about the state. The individual cities would be interested in cluster in this case. Advantage of cluster random sampling: we can estimate characteristics of both cluster and population. The cost to reach an element to sample is very high. Each stage in cluster sampling introduces sampling error. The more stages that are, the more error tends to be occur. Types of cluster sampling: single stage cluster sampling. As the name suggests, sampling is done just once. For example, an NGO wants to create a sample of girls across five neighboring towns to provide education. Using single stage sampling, the NGO randomly selects towns or clusters to form a sample and extends help to the girls deprived of education in these towns. In this case, sampling is done once. Another type is two-stage cluster sampling. In this, it is obtained by selecting cluster sampling in the first stage and then selecting a sample of elements from every sample cluster. For example, we consider a population of n cluster in total. In the first stage, n clusters are selected using ordinary cluster sampling. In the second stage, either by simple random sampling or systematic random sampling is usually done for to get a sample of element from each sample clusters. For example, a business owner wants to explore the performance of his or her plants that are spread across various parts of US. The owner creates first of all clusters of the plant and then he or she selects random sample from these clusters to conduct the search, either by simple random sampling or systematic random sampling. Third type is multi-stage sampling, which is also known as multi-stage cluster sampling. It is more complex form of cluster sampling and it contains two or more stages in a sample selection. In the simple terms, in multi-stage sampling, large clusters of population are divided into smaller clusters in several stages in order to make primary data collection more manageable. It carried out in stages using smaller and smaller sampling unit at each stage. For example, the Census Bureau uses multi-stage sampling for the US National Center for Health Statistical National Health Interview Survey. A multi-stage probability sampling of 42,000 households in 376 probability sampling uses. PSU are usually countries or groups of countries which are chosen in groups around four adjacent households. In multi-stage sampling, there is primary clusters and then which is further divided into secondary clusters and then from these we can either select the population for simple random sampling technique. Multi-stage sampling advantage is it is more accurate. It is useful in specific circumstances to serve the purpose. Disadvantage it is more costly due to advertising and messes are left. In cluster random sampling, if clusters are of different size, mostly the cluster sampling is unbiased when the clusters are approximately the same size. And when the clusters are same size, the parameters is computed by combining all the selected clusters. But when the clusters are of different size, there are several options we can use. We can sample the clusters and then survey all elements in that cluster. Secondly, we can use the two-stage method of sampling. We can fix the proportion of units. For example, it may be 5% or 50% of another number, and it depends on the cost consideration from which from within each of selected cluster we choose. Third, we can use the probability proportionate to size sampling. In this sampling plan, the probability of selecting a cluster is proportional to its size, so that larger cluster has greater probability of selection than smaller clusters. And these methods are used when the clusters are we made are different sizes. The main difference between the cluster sampling versus stratified sampling is that the cluster sampling is cost reduction. It randomly selected clusters. The division is naturally formed. We can use a natural geographic distribution. More errors. It is homogeneous externally. Population. In stratified sampling, there is enhanced precision, randomly selected members from each strata, and it depends on the researcher. It reduces errors and population is homogeneous internally. And in the cluster sampling, the population is homogeneous externally. The main difference in the cluster and stratified sampling is that in the cluster sampling, the cluster is treated as sampling unit, so sampling is done on a population of cluster, at least in the first stage. Whereas in stratified sampling, the sampling is done on elements within each stratum. And in stratified sampling, a random sample is drawn from each of the strata, whereas in cluster sampling, only the selected clusters are sampled. Now it is time for MCQs. First MCQ is the probability of selecting an item in the probability sampling from the population is known and is equal to 1, equal to 0, non-zero, equal to 2.
A
A
The
equal to 1.
No,
equal to 1.
answer is non-zero because probability of selecting an item in probability sampling is never equal to 0, and it is every person has equal chance to select it in the population. Therefore, probability is never equal to 0 or 1, it is non-zero always. The list of all units in a population is called random sampling frame, twice.
B. B.
Yes,
Sampling frame.
it is. Yes, correct answer is beta sampling frame. MCQs 3. The student government at a high school wants to conduct a survey of student opinion. It wants to begin with a simple random sample of 60 students. Which of the following survey method will produce a simple random sampling of these 60 units? He survey of first 60 students to arrive at school in the morning. Survey every 10 student entering the school library until 60 students are surveyed. Use random numbers to choose 15th each of first year, second year, third year. Number the cafeteria seats and use a table of random number to choose seats and interview the student until 60 have been interviewed, or number the student in official school roster. Use a table of random numbers to choose 60 students from this roster. What
E.
are
E.
E.
The
E.
students in official school roster.
D, D.
correct answer is E, as this is a simple random sampling. I have explained that first of all you make the sampling frame, and then this sampling frame you can choose the individuals either through randomly generated numbers or using a table. In this, first of all, he obtained the student in official school roster, then use a table of random numbers to choose the 60 students from this roster of the survey. In the simple random sampling, first of all, it involves the sampling frame. In the subjects, groups are divided into different classifications such as gender, level of education, socioeconomic status. It is known as stratified random sampling,
Alpha.
Freudian sampling. Okay, yes. The correct
36.
answer is alpha.
Alpha.
Stratified and personality divided into the different classification, status, gender, level of education, socioeconomic status. Which among the following is benefit of using simple random sampling? The results are always representative. Interviewers can choose a respondent freely. Informed can choose to participate, and we can calculate the accuracy of results.
A,
A may be the answer, but the correct answer is delta because in
D.
the simple random sampling, the main benefit is doing is to calculate the accuracy of result. We can accurately calculate the result. One of the following sampling method, which is probability method: judgmental sampling, quota sampling, simple random.
C,
E.
C, C.
C simple random.
Because all other type is non-probability sampling technique. Mr. Ali sample his class by selecting every third person on her class list. Which type of sampling method is this?
Beta.
Judgmental.
Systematic.
Systemic random.
Systematic
Yes.
random.
Because in systematic random we can calculate the sampling interval, and from this sampling interval we can list the class further. Aisha sampled her class by selecting all students sitting at group 1 and group 5 in her classroom. This sampling technique is called judgmental sampling.
Cluster.
Cluster sampling.
Cluster sampling.
So it is
Convenience.
stratified sampling technique because E. Select the individuals from the group 1 or group 2. Divide the classroom into status or group. Farmer Akram randomly picks 100 trees using a random number generator to estimate the number of apples produced by his apple tree. This is the type of sampling: judgmental sampling, stratified random sampling, simple random, convenience, or cluster sampling.
Certified self.
C.
C. Simple random sampling technique. Using a random sample generator number as it. In order to use a sample to estimate something from population, the sample should be exactly the same as the population, representative of large
Representative of
B. Representative
representative.
of.
and thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Khansa. Very nice presentation, especially the MCQ part was the most interesting part. And there was a practical examples of different type of sampling, and it has been beautifully presented. However, as I always say, there is always and always a room for improvement. So I would like you to please tell us more about how the sampling is taken from the or sampling is obtained from the universe or from the different types of population. How the population is further divided into different types before going to the sampling, and how the study units and study subjects they are different. Would you please elaborate on these few aspects of sampling? What is the universe?
Madam, actually, I don't.
Dr. Hansa, would you please like to answer this question, or anybody from the class who want to answer what is universe, population, what are different types of population, how study units are being selected? We have talked about the study units again and again, especially for sampling frame. It is very important to know what are the study units and how the study subjects they are being characterized. This is, I think, the first page of sampling, that different terms that have been used in sampling. If we don't know about the different terms, how can we go further? Anybody from the class?
Madam, population is actually the people in which may include the objects, events, or other people, and there are different types of population. It can include the complete list of similar items that exist. Population may be finite and includes large number of members.
First, we have to define the universe, right? A specified group, usually very large, that consists of persons, objects, measurements, or values, that is universe. For the population, we take the next step. We take from the universe a study group of the person and objects in which specific measurements or values have to be obtained. The populations are further divided into target population, study population, accessible population, and reference population. Would you please like to tell me what is the difference between all these four types of populations?
And reference population is the one in which we have available values or data of that population.
Very nice. You are absolutely correct. So, what is the target population, study population, and accessible population? We
Ma'am,
left with three
the
important terms.
target population for a survey is the entire set of units for which the survey data are to be used to make inferences. And the target population defines those units for which findings of the survey are meant to be generalized.
Very nice. Okay. So this is the correct answer. Target population is where the inferences have to be applied later on. And where the whole of the inferences they are being generalized, that is called target population. Are you with me?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Next is what is the study population and accessible population. We are left with the two terms now.
Madam, accessible population is a portion of the population to which the researcher has reasonable access, and maybe it may be subset of the total target population.
Okay. The accessible population is the population that is being reached or that is present in our population for study purposes. And we are having the accessible population for making each unit being known. And later on, the sampling frame would be dependent on the accessible population, because we know that everyone who is in the target population would not be able to be accessible. We can give an example, like for example, we want to know how many women they are using oral contraceptive pills and what are the adverse effects that are being produced by the oral contraceptive pills in Pakistan. So our target population would be the females of Pakistan who are using oral contraceptive pills. Our accessible population would be those women who are reachable and where we are asking or performing surveys or prevalence studies of having side effects of the oral contraceptive pills. From the accessible population, we get our study population, and we are having certain portion of the accessible population or the subset of the accessible population where the study would be actually performed depending upon the geographical area, number of the participants, etc. And from this study population, next is the reference population, where the data is already known when we know that from a certain family health center or from the mother and child health center or from a certain primary healthcare center, we know that these are the women who are taking oral contraceptive pills and they are getting these supplies from this area, and this is the number of these women, and these are the women who come up with certain type of complaints, so we used it as a reference population, right, where the data is known to us. So my next question is, what is the study unit? Now we are very clear about the universe and population. My next question is, what is study unit? The importance of study units: without knowing the study units, we can't go to sampling. So the every unit included in our study is called our study unit. And that unit can be a person, a patient, an household, a family, a school, a patient with particular disease, patient undergoing a particular surgical procedure, or patient receiving a particular medicine. In my previous example, for example, uh, what I have given as an example, the women who were having side effects due to oral contraceptive pills. So what would be the study unit?
Women of reproductive age.
Women of the reproductive age who are using oral contraceptive pills, right? Because the adverse effects will only occur in the women of reproductive age who are using oral contraceptive pills. All the women of reproductive age would not be our study unit, because all the women who are in reproductive unit, they may not be using oral contraceptive pills. So only those women who are using certain type of medicine or oral contraceptive pills would have the side effects. So our study unit will consist of the women receiving oral contraceptive pills. Now, what would be the study subjects and how it is different from the study unit? The study
Study
unit, yes,
Madam,
yes,
study unit
please.
is actually all the population of our interest. For example, if main parameters we are looking from, it includes the all population. For example, you are giving the example of oral contraceptive pill. In this, our study unit is woman of reproductive age, but in a study individual, it includes a single person in
In
the.
study subjects, we need a full description of these subjects or participants involved in the research, right? In a study unit, we know that there are certain women who are using oral contraceptive pills. In study subjects, we further want to know what are their demographic information, what is their age, what is their socioeconomical characteristics, what is their biodata, and what is their health profile before using oral contraceptive pills as well as after using oral contraceptive pills. So we always define our study subjects, and we describe the sampling for our study population in the terms of study subjects. And we also define the number of participants, how many study subjects would be included. And we also look for the criteria for the participants and how the sample selection like age, gender, ethnicity, income, etc. have been met in relation to the variable of interest. For example, here the variable of interest was the side effects that have been produced in women of reproductive age who were using oral contraceptive pills. Now we have to define further what is their age, what is their ethnicity, how they are being given the socioeconomical status, and what were their disease of interest. Like either we are looking for deep venous thrombosis, we may be looking for clots, we may be looking for some hypertension or lumps or cancers, etc. So we have to describe what was the baseline before we go further for the study. So these are our study subjects. In the sample selection, you have talked about probability and non-probability, but before this, this is an important criteria of choosing this sampling frame. What is that criteria? In sampling frame, Dr. Khansa, you have told us many things, and there is very important fundamentals of choosing a sampling frame. What
Yeah,
are those
sampling frame is
fundamentals?
important part, especially in the simple random sampling. In sampling frame, we clearly define the specified population, which population we target, accessible population, over stated unit of analysis, and specification of determining the desired sample size. And as you described, the individuals in the study units clearly define demographics, and we know occupation, various socioeconomic status,
Very
and
nice.
the
In this
response upon
listing should be complete for all the units. Either they have to be included or excluded. But in sampling frame, we must have the listing of all the units of the population with complete information as we have defined. Right. So after this, we have two types of sampling. One is the probability sampling, other is the non-probability sampling. In probability sampling, you have talked about simple random, systematic random, stratified, and cluster. What is the difference between stratified sampling and the cluster sampling? Even in MCQs, I have seen that many students, they were confused about stratified and cluster sampling. So what is the main difference between stratified and cluster sampling? Dr. Khansar, would you please like to
Madam,
answer this question?
Madam, main difference is that both are the probability sampling. In cluster sampling, we make the cluster either it may be a geographically different geographic boundaries. We can use it as a cluster. The cluster is treated as a sampling unit, so sampling is done on the population of cluster. In stratified sampling, we can divide the population into strata, and from these strata, and the sampling is done from the element within each strata. Where, for example, we use the simple random sampling method, choosing the individuals from each strata. Whereas in cluster sampling, only the selected clusters are sampled. Whole clusters are sampled.
The most important difference between stratified sampling and cluster sampling is that in stratified sampling, there are homogeneous units, while in cluster sampling, there are heterogeneous units.
Yes, madam.
right? In stratified sampling, each strata would consist of the same homogeneous units that we have already defined, that is called our study units. While in cluster sampling, what there are heterogeneous study units. And what is the difference between homogeneous and heterogeneous units? It is just like as we have defined the strata. It can be on the base of age. It can be the base on the base of gender. If I am taking a strata that is from 5 to 10 years of age, then it should be homogeneous. There should be no person of any other age in that strata. If I have defined my strata on the basis of gender, for example, the females who are using oral contraceptive pills from the age 30 to 35 years, then all should be females and they should be of 30 to 35 years. In cluster sampling, it can be on geographical boundaries, but it can be on the basis of schools, colleges, in the form of groups. It can be on on very important boundary marks like rivers, streets, mohallas, etc. So in cluster sampling, the most important part is heterogeneous. For example, all those people who are present in a certain school, they may be males, females of different age groups. They would be taken as a